Our guest on This is America and the World is Ambassador David O'Sullivan. From Ireland, he represents the European Union to the United States. He formerly served as Chief Operating Officer of the European External Action Service and Director General for Trade and Secretary General of the European Commission. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for visiting with us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
European Union, when did it start and what was the original idea?
Well, the origins of the European Union go back basically to the immediate aftermath of the Second World War, when we in Europe decided that after two European civil wars and the Holocaust had produced global conflagrations, that it was time to find another way of doing business in Europe. And so people set out on a journey of peace and reconciliation and constructing a Europe with a different business model than that which had led us to those disasters. And this started with the European coal and steel community, so the pooling of the resources which at that time were thought to be the engines of war, coal and steel, pooling the resources, setting up a supranational authority to manage that, leading in the mid-50s to a common market, a single market amongst 6 countries, which then grew and developed, expanding with the United Kingdom, Denmark and Ireland joining in '73, becoming a point of reference for the countries emerging from dictatorship, Greece in 1981 after the colonels, Spain and Portugal after Franco and Salazar in 1985, and of course the great historic reunification of the continent in 2004 after the collapse of the wall and the disintegration of the Soviet Union, when we welcomed back into the European family the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. So that's where it began, and that's how far we've come.
How many countries now?
28 countries.
28. And is there a membership rules to be a member of the EU?
Yes. I mean, it's set down in the founding treaties. It says basically any democracy in Europe can apply, but we have established criteria, respect for democracy, human rights, rule of law, market economy, which countries have to meet in order to be accepted for membership. And this is why sometimes the journey to membership takes time. The countries of Central and Eastern Europe initially applied in the late 90s and only finally joined in 2004. And some of them, Bulgaria, Romania, actually joined two years later. So it can take 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years for a country to finally meet all the criteria.
Are there people on the waiting list?
The Western Balkans are very much on the waiting list and working their way towards future accession. Turkey is a country with whom we're negotiating, have been for a number of years. Turkey, of course, is a huge country and a challenging accession process, but it's also in the queue, so to speak.
When we think of it on our side of the river, on our side of the ocean, we think of it. Was that a big river? Yeah. We think of it as access from one country to another. The ability to live or work and trade seems to be important. Are there other aspects of it that I should know about, or we should know about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is more than just a trading bloc. It's more than just a sort of collection of states who have opened their frontiers to each other. It is actually the binding together of the European countries with a common destiny. In the United States, your great motto is a pluribus unum, so out of diversity you try to create a single American identity. Our motto is unity in diversity. So we bring our member states together, we pool sovereignty in many important areas, economic, trade, politics, foreign policy sometimes, but at the same time we're not trying to homogenize the countries of Europe. We're not trying to eliminate the distinctions of culture, of language, of history. When you travel throughout the European Union, in 19 of our countries you can use the same currency. You can travel from Finland to Lisbon by car without having to show a passport, without having to pass a customs post. But at the same time, you know you're in distinctly different countries. Yeah. And that's, I think, the great achievement, is we built a remarkable and solid construction of integration, of unity, while at the same time maintaining the great diversity and glorious differences of our member states.
There are gives and gets always when you try to bring a whole gang of people together. And you mentioned, and I was thinking about culture and languages and the individual governments. But somebody's kind of setting some of the rules that affect all of the countries, huh?
No, because we have common institutions. We basically have a Council of Ministers, which is, if you like, where the member states are represented as governments. Mm-hmm. We have a directly elected European Parliament, which is where directly elected representatives of the people from all across our member states meet. These two bodies form the core of our legislative function. And we have the European Commission, which is the sort of independent executive, which has the monopoly on the ability to propose legislation and is responsible for implementing it. Mm-hmm. And so we do actually have very solid institutions. We have a European Court of Justice. European law takes precedence over national law if there is a dispute. And it is with this that we have created this commonality of a European Union, while at the same time maintaining, you know, very distinct identity and responsibilities for our member states.
Say to the folks at home, we're talking with David O'Sullivan, and he is the ambassador representing the European Union here to the United States. Lots of things going on in Europe, as you well know. We'll tackle some of them on the other side. This is America and the World. This is America and the World is brought to you by the National Education Association, the U.S.-China Education Trust and F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. Tourism, Malaysia. The Petroleum Group, expertise with integrity in the fields of oil and gas, exploration and production, energy, and infrastructure. The Rotondaro Family Trust. The Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. And Ventana Productions, television facilities, editing, and distribution services. Mr. Ambassador, of course, there are challenges that you face. And let me back off for just a second and say, how do you see your role as ambassador representing the EU here in the United States? What would you say is your mission?
Well, my mission is, on the one hand, to project European policies, the role of the European Union in those areas where we have responsibility, whether that is trade, whether that is the digital economy, whether that is the European currency, whether that is foreign policy, where we do have common foreign and security policy at European level. It's in perfect complementarity with my 28 member state ambassador colleagues, who are, all our member states are represented here. All our member states attach particular importance to the relations with the United States. And they are active promoting their national role and promoting their country profile here and their relations with the United States. I do the European bit. And this works very well in great complementarity. So my job is to project Europe in the United States, but also, of course, to report back to Brussels what's happening here in the United States and keep people briefed on how things are developing here, which may have an impact for the European Union.
So Brussels is headquarters, huh?
Brussels is the headquarters.
Okay. Lots of challenges. Let's talk about some of them. 2008, the collapse here in the United States and affected the economies all over the world. How's Europe doing as far as economic recovery is concerned? Because we're struggling here, I mean, still.
Well, I think we are doing much better. The last 4 years have seen positive growth across the European Union as a whole. And I think we have turned around after the collapse. But it took us a bit longer than the United States. We had I like to say sometimes that you had a better crisis than we did. You were better equipped perhaps to respond quickly with the TARP, with the stimulus program. The crisis exposed in Europe some weaknesses in the design of economic monetary union and the single currency, which had to be repaired. We had to do work on that. And it took us a little longer to establish the principle of the European Central Bank, which manages the euro, which is the world's second reserve currency, to play a role in monetary stimulus, which it is now doing. And we had to work on some other aspects of having a European capability to intervene if countries got into fiscal difficulty. We've now created banking union because one of the difficulties, as in the United States, was a problem of the banks as a result of this crash. This we have also put in place. So we've had to work at putting in place some of the elements needed to repair the damage caused by the crash. And I think we are now seeing a very distinct economic turnaround in Europe with positive growth and unemployment coming down and brighter prospects for the future.
My recollection is that at the beginning, Spain and Portugal had great difficulties, but they kind of have righted their ships to a point successfully. But Greece is still struggling so hard, huh?
Yes, I think there were 4 countries that had economic programs: Ireland, Portugal, Spain, mainly relating to the banking system, and Greece. And you're absolutely right. I think the first 3 have basically exited the programs, are now turning around their economies, showing strong growth and reduced unemployment. Greece is the last element of the puzzle. We're just in the process of finalizing the last tranche of the bailout. The Greek economy is also starting to pick up. Unemployment is starting to come down. So I think Greece is also now on a more stable path towards economic recovery.
I might have left out Ireland on purpose, but address that because of your own background. What was the problem there, and how has it progressed?
Well, the Irish economy, like all of the Western economies in 2008, basically fell off a cliff.
Yeah.
In particular, it fell off a fiscal cliff. Revenue declined, and suddenly the Irish economy found itself with massive deficit, inability to fund its public expenditure, shut out of the international market, so it had recourse to a program run by the EU and by the IMF. This involved some tough discipline, cutbacks in salaries, in public expenditure, but the Irish really knuckled down to deal with that, took some tough decisions. The Irish people, it must be said, took some tough moments, and they have now turned that economy around. It's now growing at a very fast rate. Unemployment has come very far down, and I think the prospects for the Irish economy are actually now very bright after a very difficult period.
Refugee crisis. Just one of the most horrible things that I've seen, you know, in my lifetime. How many people are in European countries right now? Where are they coming from? What's the policy? Because it was chaos for a while, huh?
Well, it is, as you say. I mean, one of the horrible things about this is just the human tragedy. I mean, we're talking about people. We're talking about people with families, with children, people who've endured enormous difficulty and hardship in their country of origin. Take Syria, living in refugee camps, and then eventually finding their way, perhaps in the hands of smugglers, through different countries, ending up perhaps on unseaworthy vessels out at sea and hoping to be rescued or to make it to land. So the human tragedy is dramatic. You're absolutely right, and we should never lose sight of that. This is, of course, a refugee crisis, not a crisis of migration. The proximate
How do you make
cause,
the difference?
Well, the difference is that migration is basically about people moving to improve their lives. What we've done, you know, all throughout history, the Irish came here in large numbers in the 19th century and indeed in the 20th century to have a better economic future. Refugees are people who are defined under international law as people who are fleeing persecution or conflict in their home country, which means that they are entitled to shelter. One of the things that we did after the Second World War was agree the International Refugee and Asylum Convention in 1951, because the experiences of the pre-war period were that refugees, many of them Jewish people fleeing from persecution, were not very well received by the international community. So we tried to rewrite the rules and say in the future, if people are fleeing persecution, there is an international obligation to offer them shelter. And that's what we have in Europe at the present time, people coming mainly from Syria, fleeing conflict. And of course, they cannot be turned away, and they should not be turned away. We have an obligation to offer them shelter, housing and care until such time as their application for asylum can be processed.
But it got way out of, I mean, nobody was prepared for it.
Nobody was prepared because the numbers were unprecedented. I mean,
staggering.
But again, you have to look at this in a relative way. We're talking probably about 2 or 3 million people over a couple of the last 2 years, say, seen against, I mean, the European Union is the largest economy in the world, 508 million people. 2 or 3 million refugees should be manageable if we were managing this on a continental scale. The fact is, going back to your point about the origin of the European Union and how it's organized, on this issue, the management of refugees is mainly decentralized to individual countries. When you look at it in terms of individual countries, the numbers appear somewhat differently. Germany has had to digest 1.2 million. That would be equivalent in the United States to taking 5 million refugees. Greece had to process nearly 1 million refugees. That would be equivalent to the United States dealing with 32 million people coming across your border. So I think in those circumstances, it's not surprising that our system has strained. On the other hand, I think Europe has responded with enormous compassion and humanity. The people of Italy, the people of Greece, people of Germany, Sweden, Austria have all opened their doors, their homes, their schools, their town halls to try to accommodate these refugees. It's true that 4,000 people have died crossing the Mediterranean, but we've rescued between 150 and 200,000, a figure that gets mentioned less often. So I think we have responded with great compassion, but it is true this is a problem which tests our system, tests the political acceptability of immigrants in many of our member states. And we are trying to, on the one hand, better manage the flows of people, on the other hand, stop the outflow, which is caused by the conflict in Syria, by the conflict in Libya, the conflict in Yemen. The only real way to reduce the numbers of refugees is to deal with the problem at origin and give people a reason for returning to their home and building a better future in their own country, rather than feeling they have to flee to another part of the world.
You trigger the conversation could go in so many different directions, but do I get a sense of anti-immigration, anti-Muslim, assimilation problems, all of those things kind of mixed together happening at the same time?
I would be very cautious to present it.
I know I've just lobbed a lot over the net.
No, but I mean it's a fair question, and I think the honest answer to your question is there are elements of those things. On the other hand, I would like really to emphasize the enormous generosity of spirit and compassion that Europe has shown. And the majority tendency has been to welcome refugees, not to sort of ask questions about what their religion is or what their long-term intentions are, but to recognize these are people suffering in need of assistance. But it is true that some people are saying, well, there are 60 million displaced people in the world. You know, for the moment we're dealing with a couple of million. Could we be dealing with successive waves of people, and when would this stop, and could this lead to large numbers of people changing the nature of our society? And that's a debate we're having, how to manage these flows properly, how to make sure that we are able to do this in an equitable and humane way, and at the same time acknowledge that this puts some stresses and strains on societies in our member states, and people have legitimate concerns about how this will be managed in the future. So we're trying to square this circle, dealing with these issues. There are some people who see this as a religious issue, or that religion is important. I think many people do not. These are people who are suffering. They are driven out of their homes by violence and by terrorism in their own countries. And I think these are issues that we will continue to deal with in the future. But I think that the predominant view is that we have to live up to our responsibilities and offer a welcome to these people at their moment of suffering and hardship.
Terrorism mixed into the picture here?
I think it's very important not to conflate the issue of refugees and terrorism.
Good.
These people are fleeing, the refugees are fleeing precisely the same terrorists who are causing havoc in Paris or in Brussels. There is far more terrorism in the Muslim world. Each day, I'm afraid, every time you open your newspaper or your iPad to look at your news online, I'm afraid there are horror stories of bombs going off in Pakistan, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Lebanon. And these are the same terrorists that are creating, and these are the people that the refugees are fleeing. And people are not coming as terrorists, they are coming as people in need. Of course, terrorism is an issue. We have had these incidents. We have to address it. It's not a new phenomenon in Europe. We've had terrorism in the past. We've defeated it in the past. I'm sure we will defeat it in the future. But we must not fall into the trap of giving in to the agenda of the terrorists, which is to make us hate parts of our society, to divide us, to force us to take repressive measures, which ultimately are counterproductive and perhaps even lead to being recruiting sergeants for the same terrorists. So we have to manage this very, very carefully.
Am I on the right track with looking at Austria and its move to the right, and it's almost electing somebody who is pretty far to the right, I guess I'd say that. Also a movement in France. Is liberal democracy losing its luster in Europe? What do you say with these countries moving to the right?
Well, the key word is almost. The fact is, it was not the candidate of the far right who won.
Yes, correct.
And this was true also in the regional elections in France last year.
But you get a little hint of that in Germany as well.
But look,
in the United States as well.
We live in democracies, and we cannot deny that there are some people who hold these views. And frankly, the most important thing is that these views are out there in the political domain, debated openly. Those who agree with them have to make their case. Those who disagree make their case. I continue to believe that the center will hold, that the center of gravity of European society is fundamentally open and liberal and in favor of the kind of society that has brought us so much success until now. But this is a political debate, and you're having it in the United States, as you say. So I think we cannot avoid these issues. We have to confront them. But I'm relatively confident that at the end of the day, the common sense and the basic decency of European society will prevail.
Surprising that President Obama at the G7 summit referenced our election here in America and says that some of the countries, the leadership of some of the European countries or countries around the world are somewhat rattled by what's going on here. Fair statement?
I knew you were going to lead me into that question.
Well, I have to.
And it's the question I can't answer.
I know, and I respect that.
I absolutely decline to comment on domestic American politics.
Can I give you another one that you won't?
For obvious reasons. I can only say it's a great privilege to be here at the time of this election and watch the vibrancy of your great democracy
a diplomat, beautifully.
That's what I'm paid for.
Could I give you another one that you can answer? Big vote coming up with Britain as far as the EU is concerned. I won't ask you what do you think is going to happen, but I will ask you, and I think you will answer as candidly and as honestly as you can.
That's a trick question.
It's a lead-up. It's a kind of a lob coming. No, but it's important. It's an important vote, isn't it, for the European Union?
It's an important vote for the British people. This is a moment where the British people have to take an important decision about the role of the UK in Europe, but frankly it has implications for their global positioning, for the future of the UK itself. So this is a very, very important discussion. It's a very important moment. It is a British moment for the British people. It's their moment of democratic sovereignty. They have to have this debate. They alone will decide when they walk into that polling booth on the 23rd of June whether they vote to remain or to leave the European Union. Huge implications for them, huge implications for Europe, huge implications even globally, which is why I think President Obama, when he was in London, felt he had to express some concerns of the United States about the implications of this vote. So yes, it's a very, very important debate. I think it's being taken very seriously in the UK. There's an intense debate going on, which is hugely healthy. And I remain confident that the British people, I hope, will take the decision that we as the European institutions believe would be best for all of us, which is to remain. But it is their decision, and we have to be patient and wait until we count the votes on the 23rd and see what the final decision of the British people on this issue is.
It's more of an answer than I expected. Mr. Ambassador, and congratulations, Ireland, 100 years. This is a big time, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a fantastic, fantastic celebration, and delighted, very thankful to the Kennedy Center for such a great cultural program which they've helped put on.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much.
For information about This Is America and the World, and to watch all of our programs, visit our website, thisisamerica.net, and look for us on Facebook and Twitter. This Is America and the World is brought to you by the National Education Association, the U.S.-China Education Trust, and F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. Tourism Malaysia. The Petrolin Group, expertise with integrity in the fields of oil and gas, exploration and production, energy, and infrastructure. The Rotondaro Family Trust. The Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. And Ventana Productions, television facilities, editing, and distribution services.